All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar today on the bulk conversion of GI numbers to Accession.version identifiers. I'm Eric Sayers, and I'll be speaking to you for a few minutes today about this topic. If there are questions that we don't get to today, we will be posting answers to those questions with the other webinar materials, and you can find that at the webinars page that we have listed there also. And there's also a gousa.gov URL to the materials, and those will be up later today. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to talk about today, this is essentially the third webinar in a series of webinars about changes to sequence identifiers at NCBI. And I'm just going to, a little bit of holiday festivity here, just switch for a moment to a command line. And I'm going to tell you what I'm doing in a moment, but I'm going to start a little process here that I will explain a little bit later. So off it runs, and I'm going to do a couple of other things with that, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So what I'd like to do is talk to you today about a couple of different things that we've been attempting to do with GI numbers and accessions. So one of the things that we've talked about in the last couple of webinars, one on July 20th and September 7th, is the fact that we've been changing some of the ways that we are dealing with sequence identifiers. The main thing that is happening is that sequences that have GI numbers will continue to have GI numbers going forward, but new sequences, more and more new sequences, will not be assigned GI numbers. So we are going to be switching to Accession.version as the primary identifier for sequence records. And that's something that everyone needs to become more aware of. And again, you can go back and look at those two webinars that we've had before to understand more about that. I want to talk a little bit as introduction to this webinar about something we talked about on September 7th, which is how you can use eFetch to handle a certain number of GI numbers and convert them to Accession.version. Because one of the things that we understand is as this process unfolds, you may need to convert GI numbers in existing systems to Accession.versions. But the real motivation behind what we're doing today is that you can do many more of these if you would like. So again, to summarize the things that are changing, we're phasing out the usage of these sequence identifiers called GI numbers. Existing GI numbers will remain indefinitely. All right, so if a sequence has a GI number now, it will continue to have a GI number, and you can continue to use that for retrieval. The real issue are sequences that will not have GI numbers assigned to them. Those sequences in particular are things like WGS and TSA, transcript shotgun assembly sequences, which many of which do not have GI numbers now in any case, and more of those will continue not to have GI numbers. So those sequences are a problem in terms of trying to get GI numbers currently. That problem, if you will continue to grow as we are unable to assign GI numbers to more and more of those sequences. Currently, BLAST FASTA databases, for example, do not contain GIs in definition lines anymore, and you also won't see GI numbers on the default web displays of sequence records. So, for example, the flat file records and FASTA formats no longer have GI numbers in them by default. I mean, I should emphasize that the GI numbers are still present in records that have them. They're just not displayed on those default web displays and on things like the BLAST definition lines. But after March 15th of next year, none of the formats, flat file, FASTA record formats across NCBI will contain GI numbers, including the GenBank and RefSeq releases on the FTP side. So we realize that if you already have a system that has GI numbers in it, you will need to convert them to Accession.version. On September, in the last webinar, we talked about a way in which you can use the eFetch e-utility to do this for a smaller number of GIs. So if you have on the order of several hundred or maybe a small number of thousands, you can do this. And I won't talk about this in any detail. You can go back to that webinar, but the basic idea is you can use an API call, such as shown here, to get back a list of Accession.versions that conform to or correspond to your input set of GI numbers, including bad GI numbers. So if 100, for example, is no longer a valid GI number, the record was removed, so if you do that, you would get a blank in your output. So that all works fine if you have a small number. But the real question that we, of course, had to address is what if you had a really large number? You can do about maybe 250 or so GIs per URL. If you're using HTTP post URL, maybe around several thousand you can do at once. But because of our policies of use of APIs, which no more than about 3 calls per second, if you have hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of GIs that you need to convert, this is not the most practical way of doing it. And so what other thing could we offer to allow bulk conversion of GIs? So enter this new resource that we've now released on our FTP site. So the resource is actually two things. It is a Python script called GI2Accession, and it is an accompanying database, all right, that contains all of the information. So the database is actually in binary, so you're not going to be able to look at it directly. You need the Python script to kind of deconvolute and de-encrypt that database for you. All right, so the script is designed to run locally. So the idea here is that you would download all of this onto your own machine. That's great because then you don't depend on a network connection or API traffic or anything. You just have to depend on your own machines. You need to be aware that the database file is large. It'll be about 40 gigabytes when you uncompress it. So you need to have some space on a disk to contain it, but you can get it and then use it locally. The database file contains all GI numbers that exist, including nucleotide and protein, GenBank, RefSeq, you name it. They're all there, including old GIs, all right? So GIs from previous versions of records. So everything's there in one place. We are updating this database every day, all right, which is useful to know. The database changes every day. So if you get it on one particular day, you're going to get the snapshot of the database at that time. If you need to do this conversion process again, you very well may want to come back and get the most recent copy of the database just to make sure you have full coverage. Now, one of the things that we anticipate about this is that it probably, for many folks, is a one-time operation in that you already have a big database of GIs, you want their equivalent accession. One time you can do a conversion, you can then map the two, and that's all you'll need to do, and then you can continue to update your local databases and other services. So it's not something that we envision as being an on-demand service to be used frequently. If that's not the case for you, please let us know. But that's why we've kind of designed this as one bulk download that you can do once and then kind of get it over with. So how do you get this? Well, it lives on an FTP site here, GenBank live list, then gi2ac_mapping. So you go there and you'll find a number of different files. One of the files will be gi2accession.py, so that's of course the Python script. Another file will be this gi2ac_lmdb.db.gz. So that is the thing that you need to download, and that's about 9 gigabytes compressed. You will also find in the FTP file a number of other files, which are older snapshots of that single database file. But if you point to this particular file name, you will always get the most recent version of the file. So that's the one to remember. If you want to go back and get an older one for whatever reason, you can do that. Also, a useful thing to know is that we have checksum files for that database file also on the FTP site, MD5 and SHA1. So you can use either one of those to perform a checksum after you've downloaded it. It's probably a useful thing to do just to make sure that your download is complete. What do you do to install it? So first, obviously, unpack the archive with gunzip or some tool like that. And again, it's going to blow up about fourfold, so about 40 gigs of space that you'll need. You need a Python environment of some kind. We tend to use virtual environments here. There's a variety of ways that you can do that, but you need a 2.7 or later Python environment. And you need the LMDB package, all right, and we put here a simple pip command that you can use to install that package. But once you get that package, that's all you really need, and you should be good to go. So the script runs in two different ways. So in one way, it's interactive. So the idea here is that you can just put in a number, and you'll get back the GIs. So that's what I'm showing here on the top. So you put in, you run the script, it prompts you for the GI number, you give it the GI number, and then it gives you a line with some numbers in it. And there's actually a little bit of a formatting problem here. The first number is the GI, the second up to the 0.1 is the Accession.version, and the 416, which got bumped up here, my apologies for that, is the sequence length, all right, so the length of the sequence. Now another way that you could do it, which is honestly probably a more useful way after you're convinced that it runs, this is kind of a useful check just to see, does the script run, is it functioning, is to give it a file of a bunch, all right, of accessions. And so what you can do, there's a number of ways you can do this. Take a file, put 1 GI per line, and then pipe that thing into the script, right? And it will take that and then output one line that looks like this. So it'll give you the GI, the Accession.version, and then the sequence length back. All right, so now, oh no, a live demo. Let's just say that all several times, and hopefully we'll have fun with this and nothing terrible will happen. Let me go ahead and just show you, well, let me just show you what I've got here. I'm in a Linux environment. I have a few files here. I've got my script, so here's the GI to Accession.py script. I have the database there. The rest of this is basically some Python files. But if I was simply to run the script like this, it gives me a prompt, all right? And so if I was to enter the number 42, for example, it gives me that back. And I can keep going, right? If I know another GI number, let's see, I think that's a good GI number, all right, it'll give me something back. If I enter something that isn't a GI number, it tells me it's not found. So this basically just allows you to say, okay, does it work, does it not work? And Control-C, Control-D, any of those characters will take you out. The more interesting thing is that you have a large number. All right. So let's imagine that I have a file. So what I've done is to prepare a very simple file. All right, there it is. It only has 6 GI numbers in it. So it's a trivial case, but that's the kind of file that you'd need as input. All right, so then I can just have the script, and I can just input that file directly into the script, and boom, I get the output. All right, so the output looks at 1, it's not a valid GI, 10, right, Accession.version, 406 is the length, 100 isn't a valid GI, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. Notice that it's agnostic about whether it's nucleotide or protein. It doesn't tell you. All right, now those of you who've been around NCBI for long enough and used our resources enough may realize that a CAA, 3-letter prefix accession is a protein, an NP underscore is a protein. These guys down here are nucleotides, but it doesn't tell you that. The point is, it's just a simple mapper between a GI number and the Accession.version. So how much can you do and how long does it take? All right, well, so not to bore you, all right, with having to wait around for things, I went ahead and created a file of GIs that include all of the primate ref-seq GIs and nucleotide. So it turns out, so I'm just going to, okay, bunch of GIs. All right, if we look at how many GIs there are, there's about 2.8 million of those GIs. So that's a reasonable number in terms of that you might want to convert. All right, how long does it take the script to convert that many? In my hands, it took me about 10 minutes. All right, so it's a really quick process. You can have hundreds of thousands, millions of these things. You'll get a really quick, it should ideally, conversion. Here's the idea, all right? So I get a whole big file with lots of things in it. Now, one of the things that I would just point out, since I did this and I was like, this is interesting, it's a good thing to note, there's a lot of not found things here. And what I did was I downloaded the database on one day and I did the test the next day. And of course, most of these GIs that you're seeing are brand new, and so they're not found. So when you see not found, just be aware it could be that it's an old GI, all right, and it's not existent anymore, or it could be that it's brand new and it just came into the database. Remember, the database is updated with thousands and thousands of GIs every day. So you really want to run it the same day to make sure you get the most accurate information. And I would probably guess that for most people this isn't a big issue because you're probably dealing with GIs you already have. But in any case, just be aware that that's a dynamic that's going on. All right, so let me go back to the PowerPoint here after we survive that and just finish up a bit. So some other things that are going to be happening in the near future. So in one of our previous webinars, I believe it was the September webinar, we talked about a new ID type parameter for the e-utilities that is almost ready now and should be going out in January. And so that will allow the e-utilities to accept Accession.versions as their IDs and allow them to output those. If you want more details about that, please refer back to the September 7th webinar where we discussed that in some detail, and we'll be having much more publicity about that as this goes forward. And just also keep in mind this March date when GIs will no longer be available in any of our flat file or FASTA presentations. That includes all of the things on the FTP site, such as the GenBank and the RefSeq downloads. All right, so I'm going to pause here. Thank everyone for your attention, and if there are questions, please let us know.
Okay, Eric, we have several questions here. One question is, what about the other databases that link to NCBI? Will they continue to have GIs? I'm not sure I understand that question completely. We have no control about what happens to the outside databases. So if you want to clarify that question, please type it into the question spot. The second question is, which non-database method is appropriate for, say, 50 to 500 GI numbers?
So if you have a small number, 50 to 500, either way works. You can certainly use one eFetch URL to do that number, and that should be fine. And that means you don't have to download a database and use disk space for it. So I'd probably say use eFetch if you have a small number like that. The script and database is really designed, I would say, if you have more than like 10,000.
Okay, the last question has to do with BLAST. It's about the BLAST being updated to handle GIs instead of accessions. That's already the case. So the current version of BLAST, which is 2.5.0 plus, works with accessions. Just keep in mind that the GI numbers are still present in the pre-formatted BLAST databases, so you can continue to use those as you always have. And then the other question is, I'm not clear why GI number has changed to accession. Maybe that question is about why we made this change. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, sure. So the basic question is like why this is happening. A couple of things we can say is just in general over the course of time we've had two different ways of identifying sequences, one being the GI numbers and one being Accession.versions. In fact, both of these sequence identifiers are redundant with one another in that they each uniquely map to a particular sequence record. And most publications and journals require accession numbers for publication of sequences, and that's a more typical way in the literature of referring to sequence data. Another advantage of the Accession.version over the GI is, as I mentioned earlier, many of our sequence databases, in fact, do not have GI numbers. So important resources such as the WGS datasets and TSA datasets simply do not have GI numbers at all. And so the only way that we can refer to those sequences is by Accession.version. So we are moving towards a point where we can universally access all of the sequence data at NCBI in a consistent manner, and that being Accession.version.
Another follow-up question, I think, about BLAST for making the GI lists and things like that to limit database access in BLAST, so you can pick which sequences you want to use in your BLAST database. There is a seek ID list option that can use accession numbers. We're working on making that option. One problem with that is that the index is slower to run, and so we're working on making that faster. I'm not sure whether that will be out in the next release or not, but you can currently do them with accessions, but they won't be as fast as the GI numbers at present. Okay, so a couple more questions. It would be helpful to know what the most popular letter prefixes on the Accession.version IDs refer to. So some of that stuff is on our website for the RefSeq accessions in particular. For the INSD, the submitted accession numbers, that's a little bit more complex, and sometimes they're just purely arbitrary. And the last question I see, and probably the last one that we'll take, is if I submit a new sequence, it will have a new accession or version update of an older sequence. So the answer to that question is if you submit a new sequence, it will get a brand new accession number, and it will be version 1. So we're continuing to assign accession numbers because that space is huge. We can continue to do that essentially forever. Okay, I think that's all we have time for today. If you have another question that's in the chat pod that we didn't get to, we'll answer that in a document. I'll turn it back over to Eric now.
All right, thank you, Peter. So again, thank you for your attention. Hopefully this will be a useful utility for you. Give it a try, see what happens. Let us know. If you have any questions about that or problems with that, you can write to info@ncbi. .nlm.nih.gov. I've put some other additional points of information up here. You can follow our blog, which is NCBI Insights, the NCBI News, and other social media, our Facebook and Twitter channels for upcoming announcements about GI and accession number issues, when these things are going to be released, when other changes may be happening. We'll be continuing to do additional webinars on this topic. And again, if you are particularly interested in the APIs, utilities-announce is an email listserv where we announce such changes and updates for that community. So you may want to sign up for that, and there's a link on this slide that lets you do that. And again, certainly you can write to info if you have additional questions about that. If there's no other questions, then I bid you all happy holidays, and thanks for your attention, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.